Sometimes, the person everyone ignores is the only one who knows how to save the day. The applause rolled through the Grand Regency ballroom like distant thunder. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished marble floors. Waiters moved between round tables draped in white linen. Cameras flashed. Laughter echoed. Everywhere Claire Whitman looked, there was money. Expensive suits. Diamond necklaces. Smiles that seemed practiced. She adjusted the sleeve of her black catering uniform and tightened her grip on her 6-year-old son's hand. Noah stood quietly beside her. Too quietly. His small fingers pressed against his ears. His shoulders were tense. Claire noticed it immediately. She always did. The warning signs had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. "Just a little longer, sweetheart," she whispered. "Then we'll go home." Noah didn't answer. He rarely did. The annual Caldwell Foundation Gala was supposed to be the biggest event of the year. The catering company had offered double pay for anyone willing to work the evening shift. Claire couldn't afford to say no. Not with rent due next week. Not with Noah's therapy bills sitting unopened on her kitchen counter. Not with only $83 left in her checking account. She had tried to find a babysitter. Every person she trusted had canceled. Bringing Noah had been her last option. For the first hour, things had gone surprisingly well. Noah sat quietly near the service hallway with his favorite red toy truck, while Claire refilled water glasses and cleared plates. But as more guests arrived, the ballroom grew louder. The music became stronger. The conversations became sharper. The endless clinking of silverware and crystal glasses seemed to bounce off every wall. Claire saw Noah begin rocking slightly. Forward, back, forward, back. Her stomach tightened. Not now. Please not now. Across the room, photographers suddenly surged toward the entrance. A ripple of excitement spread through the crowd. Ethan Caldwell had arrived. The billionaire CEO moved through the ballroom surrounded by executives and reporters. At 41, he carried the effortless confidence of a man accustomed to attention. People leaned toward him when he spoke. Cameras followed him everywhere. Claire barely noticed. Her eyes remained fixed on Noah. The boy's breathing had changed. Short, fast, uneven. His hands pressed harder against his ears. The music swelled as the band transitioned into another song. Noah flinched. Then another burst of applause exploded from the stage. The sound struck him like a wave. His entire body stiffened. The red toy truck slipped from his hands and hit the floor. Claire's heart dropped. "Noah," she whispered. "Honey." But it was already happening. Guests nearby began turning toward them. Curious at first, then annoyed, then uncomfortable. Noah let out a strained sound from deep inside his chest. Not a scream, not a cry. Something caught between both. His breathing became frantic. His hands shook. Several people stepped backward. One woman frowned openly. Another reached for her phone. Claire dropped to her knees beside him. "It's okay," she whispered desperately. "Look at me. Noah, look at mommy." But Noah couldn't hear her anymore. The room had become too much. The lights, the noise, the attention, everything was crashing together. Around them, conversations began to stop. One by one, table by table. The enormous ballroom slowly fell silent. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the struggling child. Claire felt heat rush into her face. Shame burned through her chest. Not because of Noah, never because of Noah, but because she knew those looks. She had seen them in grocery stores, airports, restaurants, school parking lots, people staring at a child they didn't understand. Then came the whisper she dreaded most. Someone should do something. And from across the room, Ethan Caldwell turned and started walking directly toward them. Claire instinctively wrapped her arms around Noah as Ethan Caldwell approached. The crowd parted for him without a word. Expensive shoes stopped moving. Conversations died completely. Even the band seemed to sense the tension hanging in the air. Ethan crouched slightly, studying the boy. Not with cruelty. Not with kindness either. With the detached focus of a man used to solving problems. "What is happening?" he asked quietly. Claire swallowed hard. "My son is nonverbal. Loud environments can overwhelm him." Ethan nodded once. Around them, dozens of guests continued watching. Claire hated it. Every second felt like Noah was being placed on display. Noah rocked harder. His breathing became more erratic. His fingers pressed against his ears until his knuckles turned pale. Claire felt panic rising inside her chest. She reached into her apron pocket for the small pair of noise reduction headphones she always carried. They were not there. Her heart sank. She remembered exactly where she had left them. On the kitchen counter beside the coffee maker during the rush to leave for work. Please, she whispered to Noah. Just look at Mommy. But the ballroom was already too much. Ethan glanced towards several Foundation executives standing nearby. Call Dr. Helen Morris, he said. Now. One of them immediately hurried away. Within minutes, a woman in a navy suit stepped forward. Claire recognized her from television interviews. Dr. Helen Morris was one of the most respected speech and behavioral specialists in Illinois. Helen knelt beside Noah and began speaking softly. She introduced herself. She offered reassurance. She demonstrated breathing exercises. Nothing worked. Noah never looked at her. 5 minutes later, another specialist tried. Then another. The crowd watched every attempt. Each failure made the atmosphere heavier. Claire could feel judgment spreading through the room like a stain. Some guests looked uncomfortable. Others looked impatient. A few seemed fascinated. Those were the worst. Ethan rose slowly to his feet. His expression remained unreadable. Then he stepped onto the stage. The microphone carried his voice across the silent ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, he said calmly, I will donate $750,000 tonight to anyone who can help this young man find peace. A ripple moved through the crowd. Gasps, murmurs, shocked looks. Claire stared at him in disbelief. $750,000. More money than she could earn in several lifetimes. Yet the number only made her stomach twist. Noah was not a challenge. He was not a puzzle to be solved. He was her son. More specialists emerged from the crowd. Guests offered suggestions. Someone brought sensory toys. Another person suggested music. Another recommended an app. The attention became endless. Noah only grew more distressed. Then, through all the noise and movement, Claire noticed something strange. Near the far wall stood an older janitor beside a maintenance cart. He was not watching Ethan. He was not watching the specialists. He was watching Noah. His gray uniform was simple. His posture relaxed. Unlike everyone else in the room, he looked neither alarmed nor impressed. He simply looked concerned. For a brief moment, Noah stopped rocking. His eyes drifted across the ballroom and landed directly on the janitor. The old man did not wave, did not smile, did not approach. He merely gave a small nod. And for the first time all evening, Noah looked at someone without fear. Claire followed Noah's gaze toward the older janitor. For several seconds, everything else seemed to disappear. The specialists, the executives, the cameras, even the enormous ballroom itself. Noah remained focused on the man standing beside the maintenance cart. The old janitor did nothing remarkable. He did not rush forward. He did not offer advice. He simply stood there quietly, one hand resting on the handle of his mop. Claire noticed something unusual. Noah's breathing was still uneven, but it was no longer getting worse. The change was small, so small that nobody else seemed to notice. Nobody except a mother who had spent 6 years studying every movement her son made. Ethan Caldwell noticed Claire looking away from the stage. He followed her line of sight and frowned slightly. His eyes landed on the janitor. The man appeared to be in his late 50s. Gray hair, weathered face, simple uniform. His name tag read Samuel Brooks. One of the event managers immediately stepped toward him. Sir, we need staff to remain in service areas during the presentation. Sam nodded politely. Of course. He slowly reached for his cart. Then something unexpected happened. Noah suddenly made a sound. Not loud, not dramatic, just a small breathy noise that caused Claire's eyes to widen. Noah had not vocalized since entering the ballroom. The sound froze her in place. Sam stopped moving. His eyes returned to the boy. Noah stared directly at him. The room seemed to hold its breath. Ethan noticed it too. Wait, he said. The event manager immediately stepped back. Sam looked uncomfortable with the attention. He glanced toward Claire rather than Ethan. Ma'am, he said gently. May I ask you something? Claire nodded. Has he been around bright lights and large crowds all evening? Yes. And has everyone been talking to him since this started? Claire swallowed. Yes. Sam nodded as though confirming something he already suspected. He did not approach Noah. Instead, he slowly lowered himself into a nearby chair. Several guests exchanged confused looks. One executive quietly whispered, "What is he doing?" Sam ignored them. He remained seated nearly 20 feet away from Noah, far enough to avoid pressure, close enough to remain visible. Then he did something even stranger. Nothing. Entire minutes passed. He simply sat there. Calm, quiet, patient. The ballroom grew increasingly uncomfortable. Wealthy donors shifted in their seats. Specialists exchanged puzzled glances. One reporter lowered his camera. Nobody understood why the old janitor was doing absolutely nothing. But Claire did. For the first time all evening, nobody was demanding something from Noah. Nobody was asking him to respond. Nobody was trying to fix him. Tears stung her eyes unexpectedly, because she realized how exhausting the night must have felt through her son's eyes. Every adult trying to change him. Every voice competing for his attention. Every stranger deciding what he needed. Sam just sat there, waiting, respecting the silence. Noah's rocking slowed, then slowed again. Ethan folded his arms and continued watching. Something about the scene bothered him. Not because it was ineffective, because it seemed to be working. The specialists held advanced degrees. The experts had decades of experience. Yet the only person making progress was a janitor sitting quietly in a folding chair. 5 more minutes passed. Then Noah did something that made Claire's heart nearly stop. He picked up his red toy truck from the floor. It was the first purposeful movement he had made in nearly half an hour. Slowly, carefully, Noah placed the truck in front of him. Then he looked back toward Sam Brooks. And for the first time that night, a faint hint of curiosity appeared in the little boy's eyes. Claire could barely breathe. She had spent years taking Noah to appointments, evaluations, and therapy sessions. She had listened to experts explain sensory regulation, communication pathways, and developmental milestones. Yet none of them had ever done what this janitor was doing now. He was not leading. He was not correcting. He was simply meeting Noah where he already was. Sam remained seated. His hands rested loosely on his knees. His expression was calm. Across the ballroom, several guests began whispering again, but their voices were softer now. The atmosphere had changed. Curiosity had replaced judgment. Ethan Caldwell stepped down from the stage and moved closer. Not close enough to interrupt, just close enough to observe. Claire noticed something unusual about him as well. The confident executive who had commanded the room all evening now looked uncertain, as though he had encountered a problem money could not solve. Noah carefully rolled the red truck a few inches across the floor. The wheels clicked softly against the marble. Sam watched. Then, after a few seconds, he reached into the pocket of his maintenance jacket. Slowly, deliberately, he placed a small object on the floor beside his chair. It was a toy vehicle, an old fire truck. The paint was faded. One wheel looked slightly worn. It was clearly not expensive. Yet the moment Noah saw it, his eyes widened. Claire immediately noticed the change. Noah stopped rocking completely. Sam gently rolled the old fire truck forward. Not toward Noah, just into the open space between them. The little vehicle traveled only a few feet before stopping. Noah stared at it. The ballroom remained silent. Hundreds of people watched a conversation that contained no words. Then Noah nudged his own truck forward. The red truck rolled across the floor and stopped near the fire truck. Claire felt tears gathering again, because she knew exactly what everyone else was seeing. Noah was participating, not because someone demanded it, because he wanted to. Ethan folded his arms tighter. Dr. Helen Morris stood nearby with open astonishment on her face. Nobody spoke. Nobody wanted to break whatever fragile connection was forming. Another minute passed. Sam finally leaned forward slightly. His voice was so quiet that Claire almost missed it. Nice truck. Noah's eyes lifted toward him. The old janitor smiled softly. Not the exaggerated smile adults often used around children. A normal smile. Respectful. Genuine. The kind offered to an equal. Noah looked back at the fire truck, then at his own toy, then back at Sam. Claire could see the tension slowly leaving his shoulders. The transformation was almost impossible to believe. 20 minutes earlier, the ballroom had felt like a storm. Now it felt like dawn after a long night. Ethan glanced toward Claire. "How is he doing this?" he asked quietly. Claire never took her eyes off Noah. "He is not trying to control him," she whispered. "He is listening." Ethan looked back toward Sam. Something about that answer seemed to affect him. For the first time all evening, nobody cared about the $750,000. Nobody cared about the cameras, or the donors, or the foundation. The entire room was focused on a little boy and an old janitor sitting across from one another. Then Sam slowly picked up the faded fire truck. He looked at Noah for permission. Noah did not look away. Sam lowered his voice even further and gently spoke a single word that made the little boy freeze where he sat. "Poppy." The word seemed to settle over the ballroom like falling snow. Poppy. Noah's entire body went still. Claire felt the air leave her lungs. She had not heard that word spoken aloud in almost 2 years. Not since her father passed away. Not since the man Noah adored more than anyone else had disappeared from their lives. The old fire truck suddenly made sense. The nickname made sense. Nothing about this was random. Noah stared at Sam with wide eyes. Then he looked down at the faded fire truck. His fingers trembled slightly as he reached toward it. Claire could barely understand what she was seeing. There were only 3 people in the world who had ever called her father Poppy. Claire, Noah, and her father himself. She slowly stood. "How do you know that name?" she asked. Sam's expression softened. For the first time all evening, emotion appeared behind his calm eyes. He looked at Noah before answering. "Because I know this truck." Claire felt her pulse quicken. Sam carefully picked up the toy. "Your father used to bring this every Thursday." Claire froze. Ethan Caldwell looked between them. "You know her family?" Sam nodded slowly. "A long time ago." Noah's eyes never left the truck. The ballroom had become completely silent again. Nobody was thinking about donations anymore. Nobody cared about the gala. An invisible thread had suddenly appeared between the janitor and the little boy. Claire took a step forward. "What are you talking about?" she asked quietly. Sam looked toward her. "Your father volunteered at the Maplewood Family Center." Claire blinked. The name hit her like a memory she had not opened in years. Maplewood Family Center. The small community center on the south side of Chicago where children with communication challenges attended programs after school. Where Noah had spent countless afternoons. Where her father spent every spare hour after retirement. Claire remembered the craft rooms. The sensory spaces. The volunteers who knew every child's name. Then she remembered something else. The center had closed suddenly 3 years earlier. Funding disappeared. Staff left. Families were forced to find help elsewhere. "You worked there?" Claire asked. Sam nodded. "For 15 years. The pieces began fitting together. Noah reached toward the fire truck. Sam gently rolled it across the floor. Noah accepted it carefully and held it against his chest. The reaction was immediate. His breathing slowed even more. The tension left his face. Claire pressed a hand against her mouth. Ethan watched everything with growing concern. "Maplewood Family Center?" he repeated. "I know that name." One of his executives standing nearby suddenly looked uncomfortable. Sam noticed. So did Claire. Ethan turned toward the executive. "Why do I know that name?" The man hesitated. It was one of the community programs discontinued several years ago during restructuring. Ethan's face hardened slightly. Discontinued. The executive shifted nervously. Budget reductions. Claire felt her stomach drop. Ethan's eyes returned to Noah. To the truck. To Sam. For the first time all evening, the billionaire looked less like a man in control and more like someone discovering a truth he never expected to find. Meanwhile, Noah continued holding the fire truck. Then something happened that caused tears to spill down Claire's cheeks. Noah slowly lifted his eyes toward Sam. His lips parted. The effort was visible. Small. Fragile. Precious. The entire ballroom seemed to stop breathing. And then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, Noah spoke his first word of the night. "Poppy." For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The tiny word seemed almost impossible against the backdrop of the grand ballroom. Yet it echoed louder than any speech delivered that night. Claire felt tears sliding freely down her cheeks. She had spent countless nights wondering if she would ever hear Noah speak again. Therapists had told her progress could come in unexpected ways. Months of silence could be followed by a single breakthrough. But nothing had prepared her for this moment. Noah tightened his grip on the old fire truck and looked at Sam again. The fear that had filled his eyes earlier was gone. In its place was recognition. Trust. Memory. Sam swallowed hard. His own eyes had become glassy. "Hello, buddy," he said softly. Noah did not answer, but he remained focused on him. That alone felt miraculous. Ethan Caldwell stood motionless nearby. The room that normally obeyed his every word was now focused entirely on 2 people who had no interest in status or wealth. One was a janitor. The other was a little boy. Ethan slowly turned toward the executive who had mentioned the center's closure. "Tell me exactly what happened to Maplewood." The man's face tightened. "It was reviewed during a portfolio restructuring initiative 3 years ago." "Reviewed?" Ethan repeated. "Or eliminated?" The executive lowered his eyes. The recommendation was based on financial efficiency. Claire felt something bitter twist inside her chest. Financial efficiency. Such simple words. Yet she remembered what happened after the center closed. Families scrambled to find alternatives. Waiting lists stretched for months. Support networks disappeared overnight. Her father had taken the closure personally. He believed the center mattered because the children mattered. Sam slowly stood from his chair. Noah watched every movement. "Your father was a good man," Sam said to Claire. "One of the best people I ever met." Claire smiled through tears. "He loved that place. He loved those kids," Sam corrected gently. "He knew every birthday, every favorite toy, every small victory." Noah carefully rolled the fire truck across the floor towards Sam. The old janitor picked it up and smiled. "He used to carry this truck in his pocket because your dad gave it to him." Claire blinked. "My father gave you that?" Sam nodded. "Many years ago." Ethan listened quietly. Something in his expression had changed. The confidence was still there, but now it was mixed with regret. Genuine regret. He looked around the ballroom. The expensive decorations. The towering floral arrangements. The giant screens displaying the foundation's achievements. Then he looked at Noah. "How many families were affected when the center closed?" he asked. Sam gave a sad smile. "More than anyone bothered counting." The answer landed heavily. Ethan lowered his eyes. For perhaps the first time in years, he seemed to realize that some losses never appear on financial reports. Some consequences continue long after the paperwork is filed away. Meanwhile, Noah slowly pushed himself to his feet. Claire instinctively stepped forward to help, but stopped when she realized he did not need assistance. He took several careful steps across the marble floor. The ballroom watched in complete silence. Noah walked directly toward Sam Brooks. Then he wrapped his arms around the old man's waist and held on. Sam froze as Noah wrapped his arms around him. The old janitor closed his eyes for a moment and gently rested a hand on the boy's shoulder. It was not a dramatic moment. There was no applause. No music swelling in the background. Just a child who felt safe enough to move toward someone he trusted. Somehow, that felt more powerful than anything money could buy. Claire wiped her eyes and laughed softly through her tears. She could not remember the last time she had seen Noah initiate contact with someone outside their family. The sight alone felt like a gift. Around them, guests who had spent the evening discussing investments and charitable pledges now stood quietly, watching a different kind of success unfold. Ethan Caldwell looked at Noah, then at Sam. "How long have you known him?" he asked. Sam smiled gently. "I met Noah when he was 3. Claire stared in surprise. 3? Sam nodded. "Your father brought him to Maplewood every week." Memories rushed back. Claire remembered dropping Noah off after preschool. She remembered volunteers helping children paint, build puzzles, and play with sensory toys. She remembered her father insisting that Noah was happiest there. "You were always in the workshop room," Sam continued. "The room with the toy trains and old model trucks." Claire laughed softly. "That was his favorite place." "Still is," Sam said, looking down at the fire truck. Noah nodded almost imperceptibly. The tiny movement made Claire's heart ache. Ethan remained silent for several seconds. Then he turned toward one of his senior executives. "I want every file connected to Maplewood Family Center delivered to my office tomorrow morning." The executive hesitated. "Tomorrow is Sunday." Ethan's expression never changed. "Tomorrow morning." The executive immediately nodded. The answer had not been a request. Claire watched the exchange with mixed emotions. Part of her wanted to be angry. Angry that people with power could erase something so important with a signature. Angry that families like hers had been left to struggle afterward. Yet another part of her saw something changing in Ethan. The man who had offered a fortune to solve a problem was beginning to understand that the problem had never been Noah. It was the world around him. Sam carefully handed the fire truck back to Noah. The boy accepted it and held it against his chest. Then Sam looked toward Ethan. "May I tell you something?" Ethan nodded. "Of course." Sam glanced around the ballroom before speaking. When Maplewood closed, people said it was a small program. His voice remained calm. But for some children, it was the only place where they felt understood. The room grew even quieter. "Most people measure value by numbers," Sam continued. "Attendance, budgets, revenue. But some things matter because of who they help, not because of how much they earn." Ethan lowered his eyes. Nobody interrupted. Nobody argued. Because everyone in the room knew he was right. Then Noah did something unexpected. He stepped away from Sam and walked directly toward Ethan Caldwell. The billionaire looked genuinely surprised. Noah stopped in front of him and slowly held out the faded fire truck. The faded fire truck rested in Noah's small hands as he held it out toward Ethan Caldwell. The billionaire stared at it, uncertain what the gesture meant. Around them, the ballroom remained silent. Noah did not speak. He simply waited. Claire had learned long ago that her son often communicated in ways other people missed. A look, a movement, the offering of a treasured object. They all carried meaning. Ethan slowly lowered himself to one knee. His expensive suit pressed against the marble floor, but he did not seem to notice. "For me?" he asked gently. Noah looked at the truck, then at Ethan. After a moment, he gave a tiny nod. Claire felt her throat tighten. Noah never shared that truck. Not with therapists. Not with teachers. Not with anyone. The toy represented memories of his grandfather, of safety, of afternoons spent building imaginary worlds. For Noah to offer it now was not a small thing. It was trust. Ethan accepted the truck carefully, as though it were worth far more than any object he had ever owned. He turned it over in his hands. The red paint was chipped. One corner carried the marks of years of use. Then he noticed something written on the underside in faded black marker. A name. Robert Whitman. Claire's father. Ethan looked up. "Your grandfather's?" Noah nodded again. Ethan swallowed hard. The realization seemed to settle heavily on him. Somewhere along the way, a budget report had crossed his desk. A recommendation had been approved. Numbers had been adjusted. Resources had been redirected. To him, it had been paperwork. To Noah, it had been the loss of a place connected to his grandfather. The loss of a community that understood him. The loss of people like Sam Brooks. Ethan stared at the truck for several seconds before carefully handing it back. "Thank you," he said quietly. Noah accepted it and hugged it against his chest. Then Ethan stood and looked around the ballroom. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on him. Reporters waited. Executives waited. Donors waited. Earlier that evening, he had planned to celebrate another successful year for the foundation. Now none of that seemed important. He walked slowly back toward the stage. The giant screens behind him still displayed polished presentations about impact, growth, and charitable achievements. Ethan looked at them for a moment before turning back to the audience. "Tonight," he began, "I offered $750,000 to anyone who could help a little boy find peace." His voice carried clearly through the room. "I thought the answer would come from expertise. Technology. Resources. Something money could buy." He paused. Then he glanced toward Sam. "I was wrong." The silence deepened. What helped him was something much simpler. Someone who remembered his name. Someone who remembered what mattered to him. Someone willing to listen before speaking. Ethan looked toward Claire and Noah. "And I learned something else tonight. Sometimes the greatest mistake is believing that value can be measured only on a spreadsheet." Across the ballroom, several executives shifted uncomfortably. Ethan did not look away. "Maplewood Family Center will be rebuilt." A collective gasp swept through the room. Effective immediately, the Caldwell Foundation will fully fund its reopening. Not as a publicity project. Not as a temporary initiative. As a permanent commitment. Claire covered her mouth. Sam looked genuinely stunned. Ethan continued. "And if Mr. Brooks is willing, I would like him to help guide it." Every eye in the room turned toward the old janitor. Sam stood speechless beside his maintenance cart, while Noah smiled faintly and held his fire truck a little closer. For several seconds, Sam Brooks simply stood there. The attention made him uncomfortable. He had spent years being invisible. Years arriving before sunrise, finishing long after events ended, quietly taking care of places that belonged to other people. Recognition was not something he expected. Yet when he looked down and saw Noah smiling faintly beside his mother, his answer came easily. "I would be honored," he said. The ballroom erupted into applause. Not the polite applause that had greeted speeches earlier in the evening. This felt different. Warmer. More human. Claire watched Noah carefully. Normally the sudden noise would have overwhelmed him. But this time he remained calm. His small hand rested on the faded fire truck while Sam stood nearby. The difference was not the room. It was the feeling of safety inside it. Ethan stepped down from the stage once more and approached Claire. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan extended his hand. "I owe you an apology." Claire looked surprised. "For what?" Ethan glanced around the ballroom. "For believing I understood what people needed without ever asking them." His honesty caught her off guard. Powerful people rarely admitted mistakes. Ethan continued. "I cannot change what happened to Maplewood, but I can take responsibility for what happens next." Claire looked at Noah, then at Sam. Finally, she nodded. That is a good place to start. Several months later, the first day of spring arrived in Chicago carrying a soft breeze and bright sunshine. Families gathered outside a newly renovated brick building on the south side of the city. A colorful sign above the entrance read Maplewood Family Center. Children ran across the front lawn. Volunteers greeted parents. Laughter drifted through open windows. Claire stood near the entrance holding Noah's hand. The center looked different than before. Larger, brighter, but its heart felt exactly the same. Sam emerged from the front doors carrying a box of art supplies and smiled when he spotted them. Ready to come inside? He asked. Noah nodded immediately. It was a small gesture, but Claire never stopped appreciating moments like that. Nearby, Ethan Caldwell spoke quietly with several staff members. He no longer visited for cameras or publicity. He came because he wanted to see the lives being changed. Before entering, Noah paused. He looked up at his mother. Then he pointed toward the building. Claire followed his gaze. Children filled the sensory room. Volunteers helped with puzzles. Parents sat together drinking coffee and sharing stories. A place that once existed only in memories was alive again. Noah squeezed her hand. Then, softly but clearly, he spoke. Home. Claire felt tears fill her eyes. Not because of the word itself. Because of everything it meant. Home was never just a building. It was never money. Never status. Never titles. Home was the feeling of being understood. Of being accepted exactly as you are. As Noah walked through the doors beside Sam, Claire realized something her father had always known. The people who change lives are not always the loudest voices in the room. Sometimes they are the ones everyone overlooks. The ones who listen when others talk. The ones who remember a child's favorite toy. The ones who see value where others see numbers. And sometimes, all it takes to change a life is a single word spoken with kindness.